Okay, this is our lighting for photography and Photoshop classes, and this is Ian Spanier here to tell us about his work and his process and share a bit about what he does. So I'm just going to let him take it from here. Thanks so much for coming, Ian.
Thanks for having me. So rule number one is there's no questions that are off the table. So feel free to interrupt at any time and ask questions if you need me to repeat something or anything along those lines, or if there's just general questions as we go along. And then, of course, at the end, I hope you will ask many questions. I always say this to everybody, there's no stupid questions. So feel free to ask anything. Chances are somebody is probably wondering the same thing you're wondering. So don't be shy about asking questions. I mean, that's what I'm here for, to answer as much as I can for you guys in the short time we've got. So what I thought might be helpful for you guys would be to take you through a sort of process that I go through for pretty much every photo shoot that I do. I am a commercial photographer. If you're not familiar with my work, I primarily work in the commercial portrait area. What I mean by that is pretty much that my clients are all commercially driven for the most part. So magazines, advertising, marketing, basically everything in that sort of genre. Uh, I sort of have three rules. I don't shoot weddings, I don't shoot kids, and I don't shoot pets. Other than that, things are pretty open for me. But I'm not a person that does, family portraits or, baseball teams and things like that. All the work that I go after is pretty much on the commercial side only. Occasionally, I do have to break that rule about the kids when it's advertising. And pet wise, it's usually more extreme pets like horses and snakes and mountain lions and weird things like that. So, that's pretty much the times I do break those rules. So the shoot that I wanted to break down for you was actually a favor shoot that I did. I had enlisted this subject for a personal project that I was working on about motorcycle riders, and I had approached him via a picture I saw of him on a post on Instagram for somebody that we had in common. And I thought he would be a good subject for my project. So I did photograph him for that. And then a few months later, he had gotten some upgrades to his motorcycle and asked if I would do a portrait for him. And nice guy. So, of course, I said no problem. So we came up with this idea to do a photo shoot. And so I thought I would break down a little bit of what I do prior to the shoot as well as after the shoot. Maybe you'll pick up a couple of pieces of advice. And again, please feel free to ask any questions. So, first and foremost, whenever I have any shoot, it's always about asking questions. And those questions can be anything from what's the location, what's the concept behind the photo shoot. And what I'm seeking in these cases are some information about what my client is looking for. And within that, something that I sort of took a while to learn as a young photographer, but eventually grew into the space of understanding that I was being hired to do what I do, not necessarily to be somebody that can just shoot something the way somebody else does. So for many years, I did sort of approach photo shoots from a perspective of, shooting very similarly to some of the photographers, contemporary photographers whose work I admired. And then eventually I sort of figured out that more and more I was getting jobs because of what I was capable of bringing to the table, which isn't just pushing a button. It goes beyond that by so many different ways, whether it's through lighting or just the personality that you bring on set, the crew that you bring on set, the delivery of the job, the professionalism, all those things are a big factor of that. So when I talk to my clients or my subjects for that matter, everything I'm asking is to cover what I need to know about how to approach this job. And quite often I'm just looking for keywords, keywords being something that will kind of strike the idea of the mood for the photo shoot, as far as how I'm going to light it, how I'm going to approach lighting, and how I'm going to approach the shoot as a whole. And that is primarily why I stress the importance of asking these questions prior to getting to the set. And so when you understand what the client's looking for, what they're seeking, the shot list, all those pieces, it starts to become a routine. And as you go along and along, it gets easier and easier to sort of understand your clients and deliver to them what they're expecting, even if they don't offer that information from the get-go. One of the other big pieces of advice that I can give as far as how to approach photo shoots is, if you are going to be on location, even if it's at a studio for that matter, you should always try to scout or at least know what your location is. And if you can't scout that location beforehand, then you need to ask more questions. The very first thing I do when I walk into a location is look up. I like to know what height ceilings I'm dealing with. Can I get my lights at a certain height if I need to, or if I want to? What is the floor like? Quite often, when I lived in New York, I was doing a lot of portraits of business people, and we'd be at offices, and so many times those floors are carpeted. And if we had to do a seamless paper sweep on the floor, and it was an executive who had heels on, then their heels would be going through the paper, which would cause some problems for us. So understanding and knowing to anticipate some of the challenges that you'll face on any shoot is super important. So when I did have any location shoot, if I was going to be in an office building, I would ask, are your floors, marble or tile, or are they carpeted? And if they were carpeted, do you guys have anything that's solid that we can put underneath our paper for this photo shoot, because we need to shoot this on seamless paper? Things like that, so that I could put myself in a position to have a successful shoot, as opposed to being on set and then scrambling to try to make something work that may or may not work. The other big thing that I've sort of done throughout my career is keep a notebook. And it's something that has been very beneficial to me in terms of understanding how to repeat photo shoots when I'm asked, which is always the hope in a commercial space, to have repeat clients, but also to be able to have a reference point to always be able to go back to if I want to re-look at something that I did. And then even one step further, quite often on set, if you're talking about a kind of photograph that the client wants and they're not really articulating it well, I've got something visual that I can share with them and say, are you looking for something like this or something like this? You're going to see an example of one of the pages of the notebook today. But basically, this notebook series that I've been keeping since day one has been really helpful for me, even at this stage, when, of course, I know my sets now. I know how I like to light and I know what I'm doing, but I'll walk onto some of the bigger sets that I have where maybe I need to deal with the client more than deal with what the setup is. And I can hand my notebook over to my assistant or assistants and say, this is what we're doing today. And they're going to see a visual reference of exactly where I want my lights, because I draw in a little bird's eye view of the set prior to even walking on set. The other benefit of this is really just the fact that if things go sideways, in my opinion, this is a starting point and not an ending point, which means that if the idea that I have going into the photo shoot doesn't work out for whatever reason, maybe the client changed their mind, maybe they don't like the lighting that we came up with, whatever the case might be, I now have a point to sort of launch from, as opposed to being in a position where I don't know what to do next. So I always look at it from a perspective of, this is where we started, and now we can eliminate this if this is not going to work, and we're going to move forward from here, as opposed to being in a position, and I've seen this many, many times, where somebody gets on set and they don't have a plan and they're kind of scrambling and they don't quite know what to do, and you see them starting to sweat. And that's the last thing I want my clients ever to feel, is that any challenge that we face is not something that we can not face. And so it's very big for me to be able to have challenges, and I love these challenges. I don't call them problems for a reason. I call them challenges because challenges, in my opinion, are meant to be overcome, whereas problems are simply problems. So let's take a look at what this shoot entailed. So my subject, Michael, called and said that, he wanted to shoot with his motorcycle. And so I started talking with him about where he keeps the motorcycle. Could we shoot at a garage that maybe he knew? And he was looking around a little bit, but he really wasn't finding anything. His personal garage was really small, he said, and probably wouldn't work to put a background in. So I volunteered my garage. Now, half of my garage is a gym, so since COVID, so you can actually see here a wooden squat rack that I built during COVID, which was part of my gym. You're going to see that change as we get along because I actually changed it out midway through before finishing the shoot. You can see my motorcycle in the garage as well. But I've got a normal garage. I've got stuff in the way. And this is not unlike what I face quite often when I get on location, whether it's somebody's living room and there's just big couches and furniture pieces and lamps hanging from the ceiling and other problems that will uh, be faced, or it's just simply not a great big space. So you can already see coming into this one, the very first thing, as I said, I look up and I've got fairly low ceilings, including a garage door that if it's going to be open, which was part of the plan for this to have some natural light as part of this photo shoot, that I'd be challenged by the height of the ceiling. So it'd be limitations on that side. So it's actually a decent sized ceiling, but I'm losing about a foot or more when the garage door is open. So I'm going to need to make a set plan that's going to accommodate for whatever that limitation is. That basically means my lights can't be very high. And if I am going to have any lights that I want at any decent height, I'm going to have to figure out a way to make that work within the space. The other factor in this case would be time of day. In the afternoon, it's not a very big window, but there is a window of time where the sun is beating right through the garage. Now, I did want to use natural light to limit the amount of strobe lights that I needed to use, so I was going to use it as sort of a fill light, but I did not want direct sun, and as well, the sun is not at the angle that I would be shooting, most likely because I didn't want to have to move all the weights and all that stuff if I didn't need to. So knowing that the time of day that I scheduled the shoot would be very important, this is part of what I'm thinking about as I go in. And as I mentioned, got this gym in the whole side of the garage. There's some parts of it that I could move for sure, but did not want to have to move all of the weights. I've got everything from 5 to 75 pounds on the dumbbells, and then about 285 pounds of plates and things like that. So the wooden rack is actually pretty light, so that wouldn't be a big deal to move that. And the weight, those weight plates are pretty easily changed. However, limited movement would be ideal. I didn't want to put everything outside if I didn't need to. As I said, the motorcycle, my own, I would have to move somewhere. So I did take that around the corner, which was not a big deal. But I did notice that probably the best amount of space I had would be facing that side of the garage. So that's how I essentially decided this is the direction I'm going to shoot. But once I made that decision, I realized as well that I don't have a ton of width. So without having a ton of width, I'm going to be limited to what lens I can use to do a portrait. And I'm planning on a portrait of a person from head to toe, as well as their bike, which I think was about 8 or 9 feet long. So the one thing that I was fortunate is that there is a second part to my garage, which is actually where I store my photo equipment. And there's a couple doors on that part of it, but I could shoot through the doors, which would allow me sort of a tunnel in order to shoot and allow me to get that head to toe with shooting a decent size focal length, meaning that rather than shooting at 50 millimeters where, you know, I might be bending my subject a little bit, and with this very long bike, this would not be ideal. I wanted to at least shoot with like an 85 millimeter lens or something around that distance. 70 to probably 100 millimeter would probably be the ideal. So this is exactly what I draw up in my notebook. So I did plan for two different ideas set wise. One being the main one, which would be partially lit by natural light. And then I would add a strobe light in a directional way so that I can control exactly the way I like the light would hit my subject. And sort of the inspiration for the picture that I wanted to do was back to a photograph by Irving Penn of some motorcycle riders, and his work is one that yeah, Irving Penn, somebody's work who I really admire and replicate quite a bit, or if you want to say pay a little bit of homage to his work quite a bit. So I don't love a ton of contemporary photographers, so I tend to look back at the masters most of the time because what they did with light with such limited technology was so much more admirable to me than what we can do today. So a lot of my inspiration comes from those sort of masters of photography, and I continually go back to those books when I'm coming up for ideas for photo shoots that I'm doing. So for the first set, I was going to take two X-Drop Pros, which are some really nice portable background that Westcott makes. They're 8x8. And I had two of them so I could overlap them really to just create a very wide background. This would take care of all that sort of junk you saw with the cabinets and stuff behind the motorcycle that would be distracting and unnecessary. And using the ability to be outside of the garage door, I would place my light just outside the door to have a little bit of distance from my subject. Again, allowing me to shoot in the style that I wanted to shoot without, worrying too much about these limitations. I ended up using a 7-foot shoot through umbrella, which has a bit of a natural light feel, which is what I wanted to go for in this case. And then as long as I'm in there, I had an idea for a second set, which we'll talk about a little bit, but that would be a much tighter shot. There I'd use a 24-inch deep silver umbrella with diffusion and a small shoot-through umbrella that I had above and behind my subject to highlight what he would be doing, put a little bit of a highlight on there, and you'll see that in a moment. So this is kind of what I do every shoot. I'll sketch up an idea of what I want to do and leave some room open that if it doesn't work, then I at least have this as my starting point. So whether you're on location or in a studio, I always recommend getting in early. Living in LA, traffic's a huge factor, so I'm always leaving an extra half hour at least to get to locations, even if it means I'm just sitting in my car for a half hour waiting for the door to open. But getting in early gives me that time to work without sweating and really worrying too much about having to rush something if things don't go exactly as according to plan. And this just gives me that time to move about and get my setup up prior to my subject walking in. I'd rather they not have to sit there and watch us set up. So quite often what I'll do when I'm arranging photo shoots with somebody is I'll give myself 45 minutes to an hour, which is generally what I need time-wise to set up, unless we're doing these elaborate sets or multiple sets in one day and have the luxury of a pre-light day or anything along those lines. But this 45 to 60 typical minutes will allow me to have my set ready to go. And working with celebrities, quite often I might only get 2 minutes. So this allows me to let them stand right on set, take one test frame, make sure it's good, and then just shoot away. And I'll even get people out in less than 2 minutes if I need to. What I spoke about earlier in terms of assessing the situation, it applies every time. Again, even if you're in a studio, being able to understand where the power outlets are, being able to understand even how to turn the music on in the studio is super important so that you're not being distracted by those little things while you're trying to get the job done. And job number one is the photo shoot. And then it comes down to applying that plan that you've come up with prior to walking on set or change it. And what I said about this earlier is the same exact thing I'll say now, which is essentially that if you have a starting point, it puts you in a better position should things go sideways for you to be able to continue to move forward as opposed to be stuck and not know what to do. And I say this last part all the time. um, be ready for less and be prepared for more. So that second setup that you saw is a perfect example of that. Most of the time I get an assignment to do a one-page story in a magazine, let's say, and my client's only expecting to see one setup. They're not expecting necessarily to see two. And particularly in the cases where I might only have maybe 10 or 15 minutes with my subject or less, but quite often part of my plan going in is having that time to set up, and then I'll put a second setup up just in case I have time for it. And if I do, that only adds value, and it starts to build this reputation of being somebody that delivers more all the time. And so being able to do that makes clients happy. And so I've always approached things from that perspective. Um, Using equipment that you can rely on, that I thought would be super important. These are the memory cards I use and the card reader that I use. The reason I bring this up is really just that one of the things that I've learned during COVID particularly was, I've always sort of dabbled in the department of being an ambassador for a number of products that I work with. But during COVID, when there wasn't work, and even during the Hollywood strike, when work was fewer and far between, having relationships with these companies was super important. And as we all know, photography is a very expensive hobby. So being able to have either discounts or affiliate abilities with these companies allows you to spend less money on equipment and still be able to work with top level gear. So I am an ambassador for Westcott, uh, Spider Holsters, Hoodman, Seconic. I work with their light meters, V Flat World with their V Flats, um, Think Tank bags, and even during COVID, I got a T-shirt company to sort of sponsor me because I wear their T-shirts all the time. And I create a bit of content for them, and in return, I'm able to get either discounted or free product from them. Something that I think you guys probably understand quite a bit, that the use of social media to further your careers is quite important these days. So we'll go into what I do now, post shoot. This is sort of a formula that is on such rinse and repeat that I don't even have to think about it at this point, but it's very important. I think some of the worst things that's happened in my career is obviously starting on film. Some of that film is gone, and I wish I had done a better job in some cases of archiving it and keeping it in a more manageable sense. But having moved across country a few times and different, places that I lived, I think in New York, I lived in probably 8 or 10 different places. And then even in California, I've lived in 6 different places. So all that movement, is quite dangerous. So I had to come up with a better way of keeping things organized. I do use Lightroom as my main catalog. I do a new catalog every year. And this is sort of the breakdown of what I do after a shoot every single time. So obviously, I take the memory card and put it onto the computer. And then the minute it's on the computer, the very first thing I do once I navigate to the folder that all the images are in, I change the name. Now, I shoot Canon. It's what I've shot most of my career. I'm not 100% sure it's the exact same thing with every other camera company, but I imagine it is. But once you change the name of that folder, the camera can't recognize it anymore. And thus, if you put the card back in the camera and press the play button, you're going to see a no image on your screen. And the reason I came up with this as sort of my go-to thing is that this is a final safety check to know that that card's been downloaded. So on a multi-day job where we've got a lot of things going on, and the last thing I want to do is shoot over a card, this is a great safety check, because once I see that the card says no image, then I know that it's been downloaded. Once I change the name on that folder, I copy it to my desktop. I don't drag it right to an external drive. And the reason I do that is less these days than in the past, but if there was to be a crash of any sort, it's one less place that those files are traveling to. So keeping them local first is just an easier and smarter solution than dealing with something that could be wrong with the cord. I mean, perhaps again, if you're traveling, that cord got crunched in your bag or whatever the case might be, that could affect the image transfer over to that hard drive. So the very first thing I do is drag down to the desktop. Once I'm on the desktop and everything's downloaded, then I bring it over to the external drive. Now I keep a travel drive with me, just a simple, SD small drive, something, like this. These will travel with me all the time, and I usually keep one or two with me just as backup more than anything else when I'm working on multiple locations. But at home, I have quite a larger system where I've got two drives that are mirrored, and I'll copy files over to the main drive and then make my changes in Lightroom, then copy them over to that other drive as a backup. And then every probably, depending on how busy I am, 3 to 6 weeks, I will copy those files onto an SSD drive, which then goes into storage offsite. So my files are at any time in 3 locations, 2 on site, 1 offsite. And that's because at this point, 25 years into shooting, there's quite a lot of files, you can imagine. So once I've copied over to my external drive, that's where I'll open Lightroom and add the images to my catalog, rename all the files, enter the metadata, and begin to edit. Now, the reason I rename my files, if this isn't something you guys are doing, realize that at some point, your files are going to repeat the number. So each job I do, I rename the files by the date, because that is the one unique thing you'll always have. And then arbitrarily 3 to 5 letters, which have some significance to the job. So if it's a job for LA Magazine, it might be LAM, and then the name of the subject, the first 2 letters of the name of the subject, or anything like that. It's completely arbitrary. It's just a means of having a unique name to files, and the most unique part being the date of the photo shoot. And then obviously numerically done from there. So a sequential number from with 5 zeros to start. Metadata, which is something that I think a lot of photographers neglect, super important. Realize that, if you're planning to be a photographer for a long time, you're going to want to be able to look up files down the road. I'm working on a book right now where we went back to 2007 all the way till today for images that I'd shot on one category, and being able to look up by country that I shot the images in, just strictly off the metadata, was super beneficial, and made it much less time searching for images than just being able to do it by site. So I'm real big on entering whatever keywords and other information that might be helpful unknown down the road into these files. And then I start my edit process. And so I'll be starring images, typically 1 through 3, something along those lines. And then 4 being sort of the final edit, and 5 being the select by my client. Here I'll do the minor adjustments to the images in the catalog and process out low resolution images to send to the client, as well as if selects are made right then and there, that's where I'll process out my images to bring into Photoshop to do the final retouch. So just so you can see it visually, this is typically what you'll see when you pull a card in. Again, I shoot Canon, so this is from a Canon camera. That DCIM folder, within there is the folder that Canon creates, which will be the one that I rename, that has the images in it. That's the one I'm renaming. And then I'll always put, underscore raw to signify it, to make sure that I know that that's the raw files. I only keep raw files at this point. I used to keep all the JPEGs as well. JPEGs will go to my client, but then I'll delete that folder only for space, because there's just so many files to maintain at any given time. So here's our out of camera portrait of Michael and his bike called Rooster the Chopper. So you can see there's going to be quite a lot of Photoshop work on this. This isn't what I typically like to do. I prefer always to get an image right out of camera that's close to finished as best I can. But knowing the limitations of what I'd have on set, space wise and everything else, I knew that I could rebuild the background. I did shoot some blank frames of just the background, so I had that to work with as well. That sort of ladder on the floor is part of the gym that I had in the garage, so um, easier to retouch than to try to rip that all up and all that. And then off to the right there is just a V flat that was helping reflect a little bit of light back into Michael. And this is where I brought it into in Photoshop once I did the retouch on it. And this is our second set. I knew he was a cigar smoker. He posted quite a bit. So that second light that I mentioned would be above and behind him. I did that intentionally so that I would be able to light the smoke up a little bit. And then he took it one step beyond and wanted to shot in his underwear. Don't ask me why, but uh, that was his idea, not mine. And of course, with the cigar and a glass of whiskey. So he's a bit old school, I guess.
Hey, Ian,
Yes.
let me ask a question.
Hello. Uh, Thanks for coming. I was just curious, you said that you rename the files folder on the SD card that you shoot with, and then you just not shoot with that SD card anymore? It's like one shoot is one SD card, and then that's what's on there.
So depending on what the job is, if it's the same day, I definitely would not shoot on it again unless I absolutely had to. Mostly because I want to make sure that that card is backed up in at least two other places, not just on my laptop if I have that with me. Um, I have to shoot sometimes on remote locations where I might not even have a laptop with me, and I've started using uh, it's a piece of equipment actually meant for more for video than it is for stills, but I'll download my memory cards to this sort of portable hard drive where you can plug the card in via a card reader, just like you would to a laptop. And I'll store it on there until I get back to my office and I'm able to download that. If I'm on a multi-day job where I know that we're going to need to use all the cards multiple times, when I do download that card, I make sure that it's copied over to at least two other hard drives besides the laptop. And then when I have returned to LA, it will be living on the laptop and the two hard drives at the very least. Obviously, for space, sometimes we've had to take it off the laptop, which makes it so much more important to have two other hard drives with you to be able to back up. And only then would I shoot on that same SD card. But what I always recommend is having a lot of SD cards. Main reason is they're not crazy expensive, and it's worth having extras of those so that you don't have to repeat on the same card, as opposed to just having one card. A lot of photographers I see have maybe two cards and that's it, but I think it's better money spent to have multiple cards. So I travel with about 6 cards of various sizes, but it's rare that I have to shoot more than 2 cards on most jobs, mostly for the main reason that the files are getting better at being compressed. I shoot a mirrorless camera and it seems like my cards are almost endless. It's rare that I fill up a card these days.
Sweet, thank you.
My pleasure. So after the shoot's done, and the images are retouched, I will then print them out just on a small office printer and throw those into the book. So at the end of the day, into the book is all my notes and a visual reference of the images. So you can see that original 2 sketches of the idea. I've put in what piece of equipment I use to modify my light. In the case of the first shot, the 7-foot shoot-through umbrella, and the second one, that 24-inch deep silver umbrella with diffusion and the small shoot-through umbrella unopened as a field note. Basically, I'm saying that, rather than even shoot that shoot-through umbrella, the small one, open, I did keep it closed on purpose just to make a very specific style of modified light. And then as well, the f-stop that I shot at, so that I have that note. Now that is inside the camera as well and inside your metadata, but to have that visual reference here, again, if I had to redo this same style shoot, I now have exactly how it was done, and I can go back to that. I do have a pretty regular client with one of the banks out here, and we shoot the same thing every year, and it's always in studio. And having those notes available means that a year from now, I'm not going to have to remember what f-stop I shot at because all the notes are in there. And then having that little visual reference is a great way to do it. Like I said earlier, if you're speaking with a client and they're having trouble articulating what exactly they want, quite often nothing beats a photograph to be able to say, do you want this or do you want this? So I've used this even as a sort of reference point for those conversations. And then as well, in those cases where maybe my laptop froze up and I can hand my client, say, oh, this is some of the stuff I've been doing lately, and I'll hand them this little notebook and let them browse through there and see all the various shoots that I've been doing. All right, so what are the questions? That was a lot of information. I hope it wasn't too much too fast.
How long have you been like professionally shooting photography?
So I've had a camera since I was 6. I actually tried forever not to be a photographer. I went to college thinking I would play soccer for 4 years and study sports medicine. I was really into the rehabilitation of injuries because I had a lot in high school and going into college. And I ended up only playing soccer for a year, and I was just absolutely getting destroyed in the biology classes for some reason. I was a good bio student in high school, but once I got to college, it was as if I knew nothing. And so I started taking art classes to keep my grades up, to be honest. I could draw and paint, so I knew I could get a decent grade in drawing. And sure enough, I got an A in drawing. And then the next, I was on trimesters, and the next trimester was photography, and I had a camera already since, like I said, since I was 6. So I kind of knew already how to use it. We had a black and white darkroom in high school, so I knew that process already as well. And once I saw that I could keep my GPA pretty high through these art classes, I started taking them every semester or trimester. And during college, I still just, I didn't think I wanted to be a full-time photographer. And I was fortunate to get a internship at GQ magazine. And basically at that experience let me know that that's what I thought I wanted to do. I wanted to hire photographers and produce the photo shoots as opposed to actually being the photographer that took the pictures. So I was able to work my way back there right after school ended. They actually didn't want me to go back to school. They wanted me to stay, but I had so few credits left that I figured I would just finish college and hopefully get back there. So sure enough, I got back there, and literally within 2 weeks, and this is pre-digital, mind you, something needed to be photographed last minute, and there was just literally no way we could send it out to hire a photographer to shoot it and get it back in time. And I volunteered to shoot it. It was a book review, and the book review was always shot the same way, where the book was sort of fanned open with a little bit of a shadow behind it, and it was on white. And I literally had nothing to do this with. I had a camera, I had a small flash. I didn't even own a light stand. I had a tripod, and that was it. And so I went to the art store, got a piece of white paper, made a sweep of it, put the book on the paper and the camera on a tripod, and using it on bulb mode because I didn't even have a release to do it. I held the camera open in a dark room and then flashed the strobe by hand, and then closed my eyes to see the length of the shadow on the white paper. Kind of similar when you look in the sun and you see, the spot of the sun in your eye when you close your eyes afterwards. So I could determine how long that shadow was and move my hand to change that distance. Once I got it to where the distance was correct or thereabouts, I shot the book, dropped it off at the lab, and that started a 6.5-year still life career on the side of being a photo editor. And so it sort of became my reputation in all the 13 years that I was a photo editor, where I would, and sorry, you guys call photo editing different than we did. Photo photo director essentially is the same title, but say essentially is the producer of the photo shoots for magazines. Um, and so got this reputation of being the photo editor that also took pictures. There was about three of us that were doing it at the time, and it just sort of went that way. Every time I thought I wouldn't be a photographer, it kept coming up. And I kept growing as a photographer, teaching myself lighting and different formats of cameras. And inevitably, it got to the point in about, I'd say about 2003, where I just had gotten tired of hiring photographers who didn't get, quote unquote, the job. And I could easily shoot this stuff. And that was sort of what was happening, simultaneously, was magazines were sort of saying, well, you understand our product and you're a photographer and you know how to do this and you know how to do that. So why don't you just shoot this stuff? And so more and more I was spending time shooting and less time sitting at a desk. So all in all, I would say it would be about 25 years. I think I established, Ian Spanier Photography in 1995 when I was still in college. And I used to do headshots and things like that when I lived in New York City. And that's kind of where it started. And the last full-time job I had was in 2009. I was 2.5 years into a full-time gig with a media company that had 5 magazines. And it went chapter 11 during the recession. And that was really the kick out of the nest that I needed. I had always sort of been afraid to shoot full-time, but now I lost my job, so I had no choice. But to this day, '09 to 2012 were my 3 best years in the business. I don't understand exactly what was great about it, but I just had more time to find clients and to actually, seek out clients and be available to clients because I didn't have a full-time job holding me back. And at this point, I could never sit at a desk again. There's just no way. I find this to be the thing that I was always meant to do.
Sweet. Who would you suggest as like a good camera for a starting photographer? Maybe affordable.
So honestly, these days cameras have gotten so good that there's no right or wrong answer. I think you should always test out different cameras and see which ones feel most comfortable. I've been a Canon user for a long, long time, mostly because when I was in college and my camera broke, I had a Minolta, crappy camera from high school or whatever it was, and we shot with Pentax K1000s, which were like the kind of go-to film cameras that we shot back then. I happened to get, a Canon EOS camera, and I still to this day use a couple of the lenses from that camera. I've had to use adapters with them to shoot with my camera now, which is mirrorless. But because I had lenses already, I just stayed with Canon. But over the years, I've tried, a lot of different cameras. I've shot on a lot of old film cameras. But as far as digital goes, you can't really go wrong with the big, companies these days, be it Sony, Fuji, Canon, Nikon. And I would say it's more about what feels good to you and what you can afford. Obviously, the price point changes on a lot of these cameras, but having a good, solid camera is super important. The body itself is probably less important than the lenses. You're always better off spending the money on quality lenses because ultimately that's going to be quite important. And if you are going to be commercial, you do want to make sure that you're working with the camera that's 1-to-1. There's no cropping of the sensor or anything like that in some of the older models. And mirrorless is quite a different feel than your traditional DSLR. So, it's worth testing and seeing if you like it. A lot of it is more electronic, and now AI is a big factor in there as well. I was very reluctant. I tried out mirrorless when it first sort of came out with Fuji, and I hated it. And then the sort of couple years passed, and then Canon came out with their mirrorless, and I tried it, and I absolutely loved it. and sold off my other cameras, and now I'm strictly using that, and I absolutely love it. I find it to be, lighter, easier to use, and um, sharper than anything I've shot with prior.
Do you think that your previous jobs kind of kickstarted your name for yourself, or did you still have to do a lot of advertising to kind of get out there, especially when things like this were so new?
So there's a bit of both to that answer. Being in New York and being amongst the people I wanted to shoot for, mostly at that time, magazines, because this is very late 1990s, early 2000s. Magazines were at their height. They were super important at that point. They were our version of social media, I would say, and shooting for magazines had a prestige to it and an honor, and the pay was actually decent. If you believe it or not, back then you would get a day rate against space, which meant that if you shot an image that ended up on a spread, you would get paid your day rate plus another day rate for the image getting published in 2 pages. And so if you did a feature article or a cover story, you could easily be making, $4,000 to $7,000 at the minimum, and your expenses were covered, and everything was great. Nowadays, it's quite different. Flat fees have taken over. Quite often, magazines expect you to shoot for free. There's all sorts of stuff that has changed in that world. But to go back to your question, I always felt like it was 50-50, that the photo editors who sort of got me would give me work. And then there was this sort of other slew of photo editors who were sort of threatened, in my opinion, by the fact that I knew their job. And so they would not hire me because I was a photo editor too. And so they sort of looked at it as a negative as opposed to a positive. Whereas to me, it was always a positive because I understood the market really well. I understood what magazines required in terms of photo shoots. I mean, I worked at everything from men's magazines to sports magazines to even women's fashion magazines. And I don't know anything about women's fashion. It just so happened that I could look at a magazine and understand its voice, and then sort of manipulate my photography to fit that voice, be it, I always blame it on lighting. I knew how to light. I taught myself how to light. So understanding that a certain quality of light helped drive a story was always my approach, and still is. And so because of that, I could accommodate to whatever magazine I was shooting for, be it, one subject or another. And then I left New York in 2003 in the hopes of getting people to forget about me as a photo editor completely. And, I thought it would take a year or two. It took all of maybe a week and people forgot about me. So when I did go back, which I went back in 2005, then everybody sort of knew me as a photographer at that point. And so it was a little bit different. But I would still argue that, to this day, I still get a very 50-50. You either get me or you don't. And so my clients tend to be the people who get me. And particularly out here, which is a very challenging market in the celebrity world, because there's really maybe 6 to 8 photographers who shoot almost everything. And, constantly being up against those people has sort of been what's happened since I moved out here this time. And, it's both frustrating and challenging at the same time. But at the end of the day, my formula has been hustle. And that's the best thing I can advise anybody. I hustle like crazy. I'm constantly trying to spread the word on what I do, get my name out there. Social media, like I said, is such a valuable tool in that department. But I market myself constantly, and I'm looking for any and all opportunities to continue to do what I do. So it's never not on my mind, always having a business card available to me. I have that QR code that you're looking at right there. I have a sticker of it on my water bottle on my phone, that if at any time I meet somebody that I want to be able to see my work, they can just scan that and get to my Instagram. So it's the hustle, I think, that makes the difference, more now than ever before.
Would you say that, in your opinion, I guess, it's kind of a big thing I feel like people are talking about right now is like AI impacting your world as a photographer? What's that look like for you?
So I've got a pretty strong opinion on this, in that, you know, people love fear, and I'm just not one of those people. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have a big fear switch, so it's gotten me in trouble a few times where I might have put myself in dangerous situations that, I don't even think about in the moment. Um, be it photographing somebody on the border of Mexico as a drug cartel member, standing on the other side of the border, staring at them with a gun, and you know, um, jumping into a shark cage with great white sharks around and things like that. I'll do that kind of stuff, and so that's sort of my background. When it comes to changes in the photography industry, I'm of the mindset that you can either see that things are changing and adapt and grow, or you can sit there and say this is going to end, photography, it's going to change everything forever and it's never going to go back, and all these, sort of fear-based thought process. And the reality is, no, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that those who are good and adapt to whatever's changing in the world will survive, and they should have survived in the first place. That's the whole survival of the fittest, scenario. And when sort of the AI stuff first came out, I played around with it a little bit. It wasn't for me. I'm a little bit of a purist of a photographer. I mean, the fact that I'm still going back to Irving Penn and looking for inspiration from photographers like that just goes to that end. And what I was watching was some of the photographers who really got into AI and were creating some like amazing imagery with it, and realizing some of them are, older contemporary photographers who maybe don't move as well anymore. So lugging around cameras and equipment and all that stuff is, those days are numbered. But if they can sit at a computer and be very good at prompting, they can still create the art that they want to create. And so I can only admire that part. And then, being somebody that does Photoshop and does retouch, I literally just did a webinar last week for somebody on, Photoshop's changes and generate and all that. And the reality is that if you're good at prompting, you're going to get good at it. But it's not a replacement. It's just a tool. And, in, my mentor is this photographer called Harry Benson, who, if you're not familiar with his work, you should check it out. He's the photographer that came to America with the Beatles in 67 and has photographed every president from Eisenhower all the way up to Trump. And he's sort of like the Where's Waldo of history. He's just been everywhere when things were happening in history. And I watched Harry's career change 3 times in my lifetime. And what I mean by that was he used to shoot chrome, and then he switched to negative film. And when he made that switch, his work improved. And the reason it improved is because chrome was so specific and negative had more latitude. And then after that, digital came out and he tried digital. And then his work even improved another step. At this time, I think he was in his late 60s, early 70s. And now he no longer needed to focus his camera the same way he did prior to that. And now he had even more latitude, given that a digital file has more latitude than film even does. And there was, again, this sort of resurgence of his career. And then now he's, I think, 93 or so. And he's not shooting nearly as much. He did, I think, shoot the Queen maybe a year or two ago. But his work is being sold in galleries for thousands and thousands of dollars. So he's been able to continue his career in another area. And, for me, that's the goal, longevity. That's always what I'm looking for is how can I have longevity in this, career that I love and love doing. So approaching these changes is really the point here of AI or whatever comes next is a choice. You can choose to let it defeat you, or you can choose to adapt and grow within it. And I'd rather adapt and grow within it.
Thank you.
So can I ask how your career has been or is changing, just with that you were an editorial photographer before, and I imagine you still do work with some of them, but obviously, that industry is changing quite a bit. So I'm just kind of curious how that's worked, how you're adapting.
Yeah. So, well, like I said, during COVID, it was tricky. Everything shut down out here. In particular, all the sets were down and all that stuff. So that definitely hurt. I've always been somebody that is primarily self-taught, even though I studied photography in college. We didn't do any lighting. We didn't do any color film. So all that stuff was new to me after college. So, excuse me, the ability to create imagery without an assistant became pretty critical during COVID. I would get assignments where it would just be me and a celebrity in their backyard. No stylist, no makeup artist, no assistants. And keeping 6 foot distance, all that stuff. During COVID, I actually took the COVID compliance course that was offered for free from, I think, ASMP. And more than anything, just to understand, I never planned on utilizing the title as a compliance officer, but more that I could understand what we'd be dealing with. And then during that time period, I was working on that personal project that I'd done with motorcycle riders, and I didn't want to stop working. So I didn't for about 5 weeks when everything was really shut down. But then I started shooting again in this safe environment because I knew now how to do it because I took that course. And one thing I discovered was that I was using a product that allowed me to do a photo shoot anywhere that had Wi-Fi and have a client somewhere else. And I started promoting that on social media, that here I am sitting in my living room, and you could be sitting in Phoenix, Arizona, and watching what I'm doing in real time on Zoom, communicating with me, and at the same time seeing my images as I share my screen, because my Cam Ranger allows me to shoot a file to the computer in real time, and then at the same time be on Zoom, given that it allows for a dual Wi-Fi process. So I landed some clients that way. So I was still working during COVID when a lot of people were not. There's that hustle that I was talking about. Most of my attention is focused on advertising and marketing type work because it pays better than magazines. That said, magazines have a ton of freedom. Quite often you're not even with a creative on set. So when you're hired to do a magazine assignment, it's just you and you alone with your subject or subjects. So that freedom to just shoot what you want, what might fulfill your portfolio better, what might fulfill better promotion for you, certainly gets your name out there with the magazines. So I utilize magazines in that way, plus the access to the celebrities. Something I learned in this town, quite early when I got back out here was that, to be amongst those 6 to 8 photographers who shoot everything, the not only the talent, but the PR people have to know who you are. And so the more celebrity magazines that I was shooting for, the more my name started to build a reputation out here, and what I'm capable of bringing to set. And, bear in mind, as a photographer, you're shooting like 10% of the time. That's it. The rest of your world is marketing, invoicing, following up on invoicing, doing paperwork, this, that, and everything else. And it's, it's so little time actually shooting that it's really just about how you run your business. And I think that's what's more important than even being a technically astute photographer, because you can have assistants do all the technical stuff for you if you really can't manage that part of it. But being a good business person is I wish we had business courses like you guys do these days. I have a friend who's the chair at FIT, and we've talked about many times that they offer business classes, and when he and I were about the same age, when we were coming up, there was no business classes for photographers. And man, I would have killed for that. Most of my knowledge about how to run a business comes from running the budgets for the photo department in these various magazines. And so I sort of modeled that formula, which only covers so much. And so, yeah, I'm good at reading contracts, but I'm not great at taxes. I'm not great at certain things. So you start to have to outsource those things, but you got to make money to outsource those things.
Do you have a couple of photos that you're really proud of that you could share with us? I know that I've got a few pieces of art and a few photographs that I'm like, I really feel like I achieved something with this, and I'm always happy to share those. So wondering if you
Yeah, I mean, I can open up my site here. I'm actually in the process of changing my site a little bit, so there's a couple of bugs on here. Here's the thing. I think that as a whole, this was a sort of a turning point in my career, and this is Steven Tyler, if you're not familiar, from Aerosmith. But basically, when I made this portrait, it was sort of like, it was that period of time that I was talking about in about 2008, where I was starting to outgrow the full-time job. And I'd photographed Tyler for the magazine I was working for, and he liked me, and his business partner liked me, and they hired me to do a portrait of him for he was hosting Sturgis Bike Week. He has a motorcycle company on the side, and we went up to his friend's garage where they build the bikes, and I did this portrait of him there. And what it's come to represent, even to this day for me, is the kind of picture that I want to make and the kind of picture that I know that I can make. And so this has been sort of like a staple in my portfolio for, however many, we're almost at, it's 2025. I mean, it's getting along that it's been lasting such a long time because of the fact that it's exactly that. It's that kind of image that I think what I would call an evergreen. And so in everything I do at this point, and I mentioned I'm working on a book right now, a lot of the conversations that I've had with the author is that, we have a tremendous volume of images in this book that we're doing, dating back all the way to 2007, all on one subject. And all the stuff I'm shooting now that's adding into the mix, everything I've approached with it has been from a place of aiming for epic. And now it's never going to happen that every photograph is epic, but the idea is that as you go along, the more things you can do that have some kind of quality of an evergreen in your portfolio is something to always strive for. So if there's images that you can make that will last the test of time, then that only makes you more part of that longevity that I was talking about earlier. And so, there's times where assignments call for something very specific and it's only going to last for a certain period of time. But if you can aim for things that are going to go beyond some time period, then I think that, sort of path to longevity is going to be there better. And, in part of that, something I would say, like, this is a good example right here. This was shot on a Leica camera that I gifted to myself for having a good year last year. And it was the first new camera I'd shot with in almost 20 years. And I was just learning to see differently with this camera. And I did this portrait shoot with this actor. I had this idea to kind of replicate some old Hollywood pictures of Dennis Hopper that I'd seen, and he was really into it because it's kind of his look anyway. And we just went out and we just lucked out that the weather was kind of crappy in LA that day, so we got these unusual skies. And then I did a portrait of I was on vacation and I took that camera with me and I took a picture of a horse behind a stone wall, and it ended up winning like 4 awards last year. And it's, I think that's part of it, is just, constantly pushing yourself to do things that bring you outside the comfort zone. I change lighting all the time, as you can hopefully see here. And part of that is so that I always have a solution, that I can always approach things that will solve the challenge of the day. This portrait of Jeff Bridges, for example, I was on a completely different assignment, and he happened to be at the hotel that we were set up to do this other assignment. And the magazine came up to me and they were like, Jeff Bridges is going to come in and you're going to get 2 minutes with him. And what are you going to do? You got to come through. And I love stuff like that. I love those challenges because I believe I'm capable of them. And so I want more and more people to know that. And again, going back to social media, this is where social media has really helped, because you can, sing your own praises as much as you can stomach. I hate doing it, but it's a necessary evil, I would say, in this business, that I have to be able to sing about the successes that I've had. Whereas I would rather just let the images speak for themselves always. If you have to explain a photograph, it's not a good photograph. That's always been a rule in my head. So I'd much rather have the ability to just put the work out there and let people, believe in me because of that. But these days that's hard to do. You have to also be in front of the camera.
Thanks.
Sure.
It seems like you could do a shoot in your sleep pretty much. But when you do get into that like repetition kind of thing, and you have that process of what you want to do, does it ever get kind of in the way or repetitive? And if so, how do you break out of that?
So I think my solution to that has always been approaching shoots with different lighting. I really find lighting to be the line that draws all my work together. Somebody pointed it out to me, because I didn't actually figure it out for quite a long time. But that same thing I was talking about with, learning to be a photographer who is hired for the fact that you do what you do, as opposed to just being technically capable of shooting like other people. I didn't figure that out so easily. And then somebody, sort of complimented my work and said, "Oh, I get it. Yeah, you light differently all the time, but there's something that is drawing a line from your soft images to your hard images to your, different styles that you shoot, and it's how you see." And one of the books that I highly recommend, if you've never seen it, is a Time Life book called What They Saw. And John Lowengard, who was a life photographer, wrote this book, and it really was just talking about the life photographers. And, those are the guys that I always admired, in college. And so much is about how you see. And I would approach jobs very much like I talked earlier about asking these questions to understand what's the story we're trying to tell. And then I use light to tell that story as much as I'm using composition and location and all the other things. And then having all these sort of tricks in my bag allows me to, create an image like this, for example, where we were actually doing a completely different shoot at the beach, but the sun wasn't really in the right position for what I needed to do. So I was just killing time. And rather than kill time by sitting there and not doing anything, I said to my model, "Okay, stand here for a second. Okay, don't move right there." And then I knew this style of shooting would create an image like this. And so I did it, because I did it once before. And I did it on a job where it wasn't necessarily the ideal scenario, but I had no other ability to shoot the picture that I needed to shoot. And my subject was going to leave. It wasn't the right time of day. All those things were against me, but I did it. And I put that in my pocket and said, this is going to be a solution for another day as well. And, something I talk about all the time is failing. And I love to fail because you learn from failing, and you can make all the mistakes, and it's how you respond to those mistakes that it really makes you stronger. So when something doesn't go right, it allows me to say, well, what could I do to make that better? And even successful shoots, I like to look at those and say, oh, this is something that I did, but I could probably do this better by doing it this way or that way.
Sure.
What advice would you give students they're in school right now, they're building their portfolios, and while they're in school before they graduate, what would be kind of your advice for things outside of class or in conjunction with class that maybe they should be thinking about or pursuing?
So the two things I sort of always say with advice is the thing I just said about failing, learn to fail because it's really good for you, and learn from those failures. And then the main thing is to shoot. You just need to shoot. It's the same thing with music, probably writing, but you need those 10,000 hours and then some. And when you put that time in, what you'll learn is not just how you see, but also finding a way to rinse and repeat that you put yourself in a better position for success. I can tell you right now that, here's a great example. This is for a marketing job on this cigar company. And, most of my jobs come at the wrong time of day. I'm asked to shoot at noon all the time. And we had to create what seemed like we had been on the ground with this guy for 3 weeks in less than 72 hours. And, again, lighting comes down to solving that issue for me. And so creating moments and paying attention and knowing the product in a way that I can create something that's not actually happening and sell it that it is. And that's sort of become a big part of that sort of genre of what I do. And that only comes from the amount of time that I've done these things. I've shot cigars for not to reveal too much, but 2007 is the project I'm working on right now. And having shot cigar stuff for, since 2007, I'm not a cigar guy. I don't know much other than what I've learned over these, past, almost 20 years in the cigar world. Yeah, I know a lot because I've experienced all these things and shot all these things, but I'm not, I couldn't tell you the name of a brand over another just by sight or anything like that. It was the same thing when I worked in fitness. I used to shoot Mr. Olympia competitions and all the other stuff like that. If I didn't photograph the person, I didn't know who they were. I don't follow the sport or anything like that. And so as a result, I pay attention to details, and those attention to details allow me to anticipate moments when they're about to happen, and at the same time create those moments when I have to create fake moments of something happening when it's not at the luxury of waiting around for it to take place.
So in terms of building a portfolio as a photographer, like obviously you use Photoshop to edit photos, change the backgrounds as you need to, probably clean up things where they are dirty, or are not clean. When you're putting together a portfolio and you're presenting your work, do you try to communicate like, oh yeah, I changed the background in this and I, did several overlays, or is the photo itself the product that you're selling? You don't really need to communicate all the things you did to that photo to make it work.
Well, as I said before, the sort of mark of a good photograph is that you don't need to explain it. I think there's a famous saying about that, something about no more than 5 words should be used to describe a photograph. Otherwise it's not successful. I'm paraphrasing like crazy there, but the reality is that your work should stand on its own without you being there. So if someone, which is what happens to these days most of the time, is going to judge you strictly off of your social media or your website, that you're not there to explain it. And if you're not there to explain it, it's got to be strong enough that your presence isn't what sells the product. Quite often people get jobs because their personality on set is the right personality. They may not be the most astute photographer necessarily, but their personality or their crew or whatever they bring to set makes that bigger difference, that's important too. It's not just about shooting. Like I said before, it's 10% of the time it's shooting as a photographer. So the reality is that repeat clients come from the ability to have a sort of personality that meshes with everybody else. When you're putting your portfolio together, truly the important thing is quality over quantity. I do portfolio consulting for photographers quite often, and I'm always saying to them, all right, show me 100 photos. Okay, out of that 100 photos, how many are successful? And let's get it down. So then we get it to 50. Okay, out of these 50, what are the ones that truly say what you're trying to say as a photographer? Now we're down to 25. And they're freaking out because now they're like, well, I need to have a portfolio full of images. And I'm like, no, you don't. So out of that 25, how many of these actually are successful images, are images that you never have to explain to me? And then we get it down to 15. And again, they're freaking out about the small number. But I'm saying, but these 15 images tell me who you are as a photographer. Everything else is just noise. So if you feel like you need more in your portfolio, find the holes that are within that and fill those holes. But don't give me 25 images, 10 of which are crap. I'd rather see 15 strong images that, I mean, let's think about it this way. You guys are of the age, you're thumbing through Instagram or TikTok so quickly, right? So how much time are you actually spending looking at a photograph? If somebody goes to your website, which is why, well, as I said, my site's changing slightly right now, but if this is all you saw, that's the message I'm trying to get across. Okay, he shoots celebrities, he shoots men, he shoots women, he can shoot women of color, he can shoot in studio, he can shoot on location. Okay, maybe I'll go a little bit further. Oh wait, he also shoots this style. Okay, and he does lighting. Okay, I get that he does lighting. Okay, he could probably do the job. That's what happens at the desk these days. Nobody's sitting here going through all these images. And so, like I said, I'm starting to change my site slightly so that if somebody only comes to this page and this page only, that they get the message. My site over the years has changed, and at one point I only had it where I had 6 images flash on screen, and I would change those 6 images pretty often, in the mere sense that if all somebody was looking at was those 6 images, they would understand what I do. So point of it is really just that always look at it for quality over quantity. And if you see that you need to fill in holes, saying, well, I'm not showing a studio portrait, but I do studio stuff, then you need to go and make that studio portrait and fill in that hole.
So how important are deadlines?
What'd you say, deadlines?
Yeah.
Utmost important. I have to make them all. There's a saying I've had for, I don't know, 20 years probably, that I'll sleep as for suckers, or I'll sleep when I'm dead. One version of the other. I've never missed a deadline. I couldn't even answer that question for you. I don't think. Yeah. I mean, I've obviously I have more than one client, right? So, I try to inform my clients, hey, I'm traveling. In some cases I'm traveling, I won't have access to Wi-Fi. If you need images from me, please get them before this date. All that stuff, all that communication is super important. Half the time it doesn't matter because they still hit you up when you're just boarding a flight or whatever the case might be. There was a period of time where I used to have access to my computer remotely, and I remember I was actually in Africa and retouching an image from a hotel room in Africa and sending it to a client in California. Over this, like, I was pulling the file remotely from my computer to my home computer. It was crazy, and unfortunately that software went out of business. But I'll bring everything with me on that travel job that's open. So if I shot a job even 4 months ago and they haven't ordered images yet, I might bring that with me just in case they do order an image while I'm gone. It's it's of the utmost importance that I keep my clients. So whatever they ask me, I tend to bend over backwards to make sure I can get it to them and be available to them.
So I'm also curious, so what you edit other photographers' work, do you edit your own work or do you get help?
I typically I edit my own, but the clients really drive it these days. It's funny, magazines have sort of changed too, in the sense that, when I was a photo director, I would very distinctly say what I wanted, and I'd hire the photographer specifically for that. I would direct that photographer specifically to what I'm looking for, all those parts. And these days, and again, this sort of goes to why I sort of formulated that thought that people were hiring me to do what I do. But these days, quite often, it's just, hey, are you available? Okay, cool. Here's your subject. Go ahead and touch base with them, see if they're available the same, time that you want to shoot or whatever. And then go and figure it out. And that's kind of what happens a lot these days. Or I get set on set and I get my 2 minutes, in between takes of a show that's being filmed, or a movie set, or whatever the case might be, and be ready. And that's kind of it. So realistically, it's at this point, it's, sorry, I sort of lost what you were asking there. Sorry.
We were talking about,
Do you do your own editing, or do you?
Oh, yes. So for sure, magazines, I'm doing the retouching on all that stuff. I will edit down to, what constitutes, my selects for a lot of the magazines, because they're so short staffed these days that they're asking you to limit the number of images you drop to them. So if I shoot, let's say I have a long shoot, we have 300 images. They don't want 300 images. They want, the 25 best or 50 best. So I'll whittle it down to what I saw that day. And they're pretty good about sort of, putting out what you give them in that sense. Other clients, I shoot, key art for Beachbody, for example. It's a fitness company. They take everything and they do their own retouching, and they handle everything, after the shoot. And I don't have anything to do after I hand off those files, which is, good and bad, depending on the client. Some have good retouchers, some don't. So you have to live with, what the job entails.
Who is your favorite and least favorite celebrity to work with, and why?
I've been fortunate that most, almost all, have been very good to me. I have had a couple of bad experiences. This is being recorded, so I'm not going to name names, but the quickest way to get killed in this industry. But I would say that you never know what you're going to get on the day. So if they're in a bad mood, you might become the target of that bad mood, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's got nothing to do with, who you are. And that one really bad experience was completely that. They knew what they were doing when they walked on set, and it wasn't going to be good. So it didn't matter what I did. I would definitely say sometimes athletes don't give a shit about, excuse my language, about doing the photo shoot. But I think that I've been, very fortunate in that whatever I do to present myself seems to work with most athletes. Being somebody that's athletic, I think they sort of are relieved that I'm not like this artsy guy or whatever. I'm very normal and I'm pretty quiet. So even on terms of celebrities, I'm not there to compete with their ego, which a lot of celebrity photographers have sort of turned into, in my opinion. And so me being on set, I'm just there to get the job done, and I'm super easygoing about it. And I'm, my sets are always very calm, and, my goal is to create this atmosphere that, like, it's all good. We got it. The fact that, what you said earlier about, you look like you could do a shoot in your sleep. Like, that's what I want everybody to sort of get from what I do, that it is not rocket science, and we're not, reinventing the wheel here. So here's what I've got. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show it to you. You're going to like this. And if you don't, we can go this way, and all those kind of things. And, again, what I talked about before about, surrounding yourself with the right people as well. That's, goes past that 10% of shooting. It's who your crew is that reflects you. So, quite often my repeat clients will say, we love working with you, not just because of what you do, but that your whole, like, everyone who surrounds you repeats what you do. Everybody's cool, everybody's chill, there's no drama. I just don't do that stuff. I'm not built for that. So I don't care about the gossip, and I don't care about the drama on a set, and I don't want to be the focus of attention or any of those things. So my goal is always to have everybody in a good place. And, on the big shoots that I do, my producer reflects that entirely. She will pamper the clients so that they understand that they're the most important person that day, just in the same way that I'm there to please, and do what they're hiring me. I'm thankful that they're hiring me. So I'm going to do the job if I got to hang upside down from the ceiling, I'll get it done.
How many jobs have you had to hang from upside your ceiling?
There's been a few, actually. There was one recently where I had to go above this. They asked me to shoot above, and we were not, prepared for that, to say the least. And it certainly wasn't the safest way of doing it. But I was on top of a ladder and having, again, thankful that it's a mirrorless camera, and you've got a retractable screen that helps a little bit. But to be at the top of like an 18-foot ladder and hanging your hands out this way, you're working those abs, let me put it that way. And it's it's hot up in the ceiling. I will say that for sure. And then I definitely have a lot of stories. I mean, I was shooting a rock climber in Boulder one time, and we weren't even far out at all, and we had dragged our gear up this mountain, and it was very small crew. It was just creative director and myself and the rock climber, and she rigged me to the rock so that I could hang backwards and shoot up so you couldn't see the city at all. And that's crazy enough in a certain way. But then I went to go switch lenses, and I came off the rope, and I went to go climb over the rocks, and I literally stepped 6 inches from a rattlesnake that was all coiled up and ready to go. And we were like laughing about it, because then I stopped and I took pictures of it, of course. And that's that stupid fear switch that doesn't go on. And then we were kind of like walking down, and we were like, God, if you got bit, like that would have been really bad. Like we weren't close enough to do anything about it, and we couldn't get back to the car fast enough. And yeah, that could have gone really south really fast. But it's sort of part of the adventure. I love all of it, so it doesn't bother me to be in those situations.
So you have a crew, do you have like a group of people that you prefer to work with, or is it just kind of whatever's available? Like, how do you put together your crew?
So I have a first assistant who I work with most of the time, and he's always my first call. I share him with a number of other photographers. Most of us are freelance out here. And then, from there, there's, 2 or 3 other like regular guys that I work with, who know my style and know my sense of working. And again, I'm choosing them more than anything off of their personalities and their skill at the same time. So I'll take somebody with a little less skill, that even if I have to sort of teach them, if it means that their personality fits with my aesthetic, if you want to put it that way. And then bigger jobs, I do have a producer that I work with. I don't have a rep, but she will act as my rep sometimes. If it's a situation where I feel that it's better that the client speaks with her about money than me, which is something you kind of learn as you go along, because you don't want to necessarily be the person talking money at the same time that you got to be talking creative. And I certainly have some clients that I do, but it's definitely much easier if you can separate the two things. And then hair, makeup, styling, all that, slew of people that I work with on the regular, sometimes new people, certain agencies that I really like who have people who I like. And, they're always the first call. And then if they're not available, you move on from there. But I do always try to find people who are talented and then also reflect that personality that I'm trying to get across on set.
How did you get comfortable with the rate that you're charging, I guess, or just comfortable with money in the industry just in general, especially if you're having to handle it by yourself?
So, as I mentioned, numbers have changed quite a bit over the years, and this is probably not a great time to be a photographer, but I could tell you 25 years ago, people said the same thing, and it's all relative. But as we know, inflation is crazy these days, and everything's getting more expensive, and rates are going down, unfortunately. My rule of thumb is the same thing I tell my assistants who are working towards being full-time photographers, is basically that you come up with a rate that at the end of the day when you go home you're not mad at the fact that you took that amount of money to do the job. And so if you're going home pissed off that you just got paid X number of dollars and you just got used, then you're doing it wrong. So even on the jobs that I take that are small, a magazine job, for example, that might be a flat rate. How I approach it is always from the same perspective that I'm going to still give you a Vanity Fair level type picture. And that's always my goal. But whether it's $500 or $5,000, but I'm never mad at taking that $500 for that day. I have turned down work. I don't like to do that very much. I try never to do it as much as I can. But if a job is not right for me, I'm not going to do it just for the money, because it doesn't benefit me as a photographer. It takes away from where my focus should be, which is on doing what I do. So yeah, at the end of the day, as long as you're satisfied with what you got paid to do that job, and you'll fail at this. I fail at it all the time, but I learn from those mistakes and don't do it again.
What you were saying about maintaining focus, what's your do you have a drive, or is it just a subconscious thing?
I think honestly, I am a hustler. It's just what I do, not in a Jay-Z sense, but like in a, I want to keep doing this and I want to do it for a long time. So I'm constantly pushing. I'm really hard on myself. I'm the same. I still play sports and I'm the same way in sports. I don't care what anybody else is doing. I don't care if you beat me at something, but if I do well, I'm never upset. If I do poorly, I'm mad at myself, and that's it. I do a lot of, solo sports now, and, golf being a great analogy for life. If I do horribly on the golf course, that's my fault. I failed. And I'm hard on myself about it. So it's the same in photography for me, that I'm constantly pushing and trying to figure out what's the piece of the puzzle that I haven't gotten yet. And there's always more. You may look at what I do and say, wow, he's made it, he's done it. I don't look at it that way. I look at it, I've made a certain thing and I make a living, but I could do more. I know I'm capable of a lot more.
Yeah.
What's your dream job?
I wouldn't say it's a thing. I think again, it's just regularly working. My sort of goal when I moved out here was to do more in the network field. I got out here and I had a great client at VH1 and MTV, and I had a billboard on Sunset Boulevard the first 3 months I was here, and I was like, there, I did it and made it. This is what I wanted. And then that entire department got cut. And it was like I had to start over again, and it was quite a hit. when I initially moved here, I had 4 clients that were here, and 3 went out of business, and 1 moved to Vegas full time with a photographer on staff. So I really did have to start over in a lot of ways in mid 2015, I'd say. And the reality is that, you know, I do have this goal of shooting more in network and movies, so television and movies, basically. Um, I know I can do that stuff more, and it's sort of that white whale at this point where I just need to find that client that believes the same thing I believe and puts me in that position on the regular, not just one and done. Whereas, yes, I've accomplished some of those things, but not regular enough for me.
Ian, do you use just umbrellas or do you use softboxes also? Going back to a little lighting.
Sure. So I use everything.
Okay.
There's certainly some things I don't use. I have at some point, but not regularly. I change up my lighting quite a lot. And, you know, being an ambassador for Westcott, I get access to a lot of stuff. I test new stuff for them. I actually developed that 24-inch umbrella that I mentioned earlier for them based off an idea that I had, and worked with their design team to come up with it. So I'm always reaching other ways to do lighting. And again, it's all, you know, story driven. That's how I approach photo shoots, is what is the story that I'm trying to tell, whether it's my concept as far as a shoot goes, or it's somebody else's. I'm always looking at it from how can I best tell that story through lighting. So I need access to all those different tools to do that, the different modifiers, and everything I do lighting wise. It's a whole nother speech, but is based off the natural world. That's been my best teacher as far as lighting is concerned. So many of the concepts that I have and styles that I've created over the years of lighting has been something that was inspired by natural world in some form or fashion, even if it's combinations of different ones together. So if you do follow me on Instagram, you'll see I put a lot of that, you know, BTS stuff there. You'll see the different things that I do. I repeat a lot of stuff, things that work really well for me. A friend of mine coined one of my setups as the Spanier stack. It's just a stacking of 2 umbrellas that I do on one stand, and I use that a lot because it's sort of like that Steven Tyler image that we were talking about earlier. It just says everything I'm trying to say quite often. So it works across different subjects and works across different stories, different clients. So that one gets repeated a good amount. But literally just the other day, we were shooting a marketing campaign for a drink company, and I did a completely new style of light. And my assistant was like, where did this one, you know, come from? Why did you do this? And I've been trying to do it for, you know, a couple of years, and I just haven't had the opportunity, and this one presented itself. So I said, let's start with that. And sure enough, it worked. I see it in my head, but I think it's because I've already seen it in natural world. And so I see it in my head. It's how am I going to recreate something I saw outside with artificial light? And that's sort of my thought process when it comes to how I'm going to approach these jobs.
Do you have a favorite vintage film camera? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, so I sold off all of my film cameras except for one. It's a Rollei well, it's 2 really, but Rollei SL66E was like, man, I love that camera. It was very similar to a Hasselblad, same style, square format, you know, view from the top, and just this great lens. I just loved the quality of light. There's a bellows on it, so it had this sort of amazing quality. And having shot on it forever, I still have some film sitting around that's way outdated, but you know, that it's a time factor. I did keep my 4x5 cameras, some because they're just, you know, they're just nice shelf material, but I have a really nice 4x5 that's Japanese titanium and mahogany wood, and I just couldn't get rid of it because it's just too cool of a camera. But I recently bought a a back that was made for it that takes instant film. And I shot a couple frames on it just to see what it would be like. And just, my God, it's so slow compared to digital today. And I would really have to just have the perfect scenario to utilize it on a shoot, because everybody wants everything immediate. Like, I mean, half the jobs I do, the client's sitting there with a hard drive waiting for the end of the day to just hand over everything. And so it'd have to be the perfect situation to use it. But you know, it's one of those things where, you know, maybe it'll come around. I do have a dream at some point of having a darkroom again, but you know, the chemicals are so expensive right now, and just to give up a room for that wouldn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally.
I did create a way, by the way, of doing tintype in Photoshop, and I fooled a bunch of tintype people.
Oh,
They
sweet. Nice.
think that it was tintype, which I was surprised that they were fooled, considering they all shoot it. But the nice thing about it is it's completely controllable,
Right.
unlike tintype where you can't necessarily control the output. But this one is great, and I did have a client have me do it for one of the assignments because she liked it. She wanted something different, and when I told her I can control where the focus hits and all that stuff, she was into it.
Cool. In this day and age, do you find LA or New York to be busier in terms of like where there's more of a photo market? And or
It's
what's
a
a
saturated market no matter where you go. I mean, everybody with this thing is a photographer. So, yeah, that is the reality of our world, unfortunately. I mean, the fact that you can go and get, you know, spend $2,500 and have a professional grade camera. I mean, think about it. When it was like 1950, there was probably 50 photographers that were shooting stuff. You know, it was just a different world. So now that it's so everywhere, the competition is that much higher. But just like I talked about earlier with AI, you know, the cream of the crop is always going to rise up. So if you're good at what you do, you know, I say this often when we're scrolling through social media and whatnot, and you pause for more than a second to look at an image, then there's something successful about that image. And I think looking back maybe 25 years ago, it was probably 30 seconds or a minute that you would do that. So you'd be thumbing through a magazine and then you'd pause to look at an image for maybe 30 seconds. There's something successful about that image, in my opinion. Same thing if you're walking through a museum and you stop to look at a painting or a photograph or whatever the piece of artwork is. There's something successful to a level about that. Now on social media, the danger is that so much is out there that is actually crap, but it works really well at this size.
right?
And if you actually dissected that image, you'd see that it's not that great. And it's the same thing in the webinar last week when we were talking about AI. I was remarking that I did a bit of research and I was looking through like all the examples of people using, you know, Generate in Photoshop and how great it is and how you can do this and do that. But it's always low resolution images. And the reality is it's changing the image. And what do you do if the client doesn't want to change the person's hair? And that's the only way to get them off that background perfectly is to create fake new hair. And so much of what is generated actually isn't great quality. Even, you know, if we were taking this image that you're looking at right here and expanding the screen, the frame, to create that background, it might not be the same focal length that the image was shot at, and AI doesn't understand that yet. So it works really well if you're looking at it on your small screen, but if you were actually to print it or make a large print of it, it's not quite the same. And so, you know, there's the danger of saying, oh, well, that person's such a great photographer, but then you really look and it's not true. You know, it could be completely out of focus, but at 2 inches, it works really well.
Exactly.
We've got a couple images from students. Do you mind giving a little feedback?
Sure. Do I need to turn off screen sharing or anything?
Uh,
Yeah.
Okay. And nope, not you. Let's do that.
So do you have questions or what do you want? How do you want me to respond?
This is Hussein. We were working on just kind of mastering one light, creating some Rembrandt lighting. And also they were practicing engaging with their subjects, their models, and trying to just kind of bring out something more than the zombie gaze or mugshot.
So there's an interesting, so I was, I ended up being a double in art and psychology because I'd been taking psych classes to keep on the track of the sports medicine stuff. And so when I made the switch, it was, I was just in a position that if I just took, two more psych classes, then I would be a double major. So I always talk about the importance of psychology and photography and how, interacting with your subjects is such a big part of the equation of capturing who they are. Because the reality is, especially when you only have a few seconds or a few minutes with somebody, that you're, quote unquote, trying to get their essence and all that stuff. So I sort of had come up with, and everybody needs to figure out what their formula is based on their personality. But something that sort of worked for me has been this thing where I, shake hands with them and say hello. I introduce myself and I say, this is where we're, this is what we're doing today. And, this is the light where your main light's coming from. If it's, something that I need them to see. And then I'll say something like, I can't tell you how to be you. So you be yourself and I'll just be back here. And if I need you to do something different, then I'll let you know. But if I'm quiet, it means you're doing great. I don't need to say anything. And if, don't be disarmed by me being quiet. It just means you're doing great. And if I say something, don't be disarmed by that. It just means that I want something different, or I saw you do something and I want you to repeat it, or anything along those lines. And my whole point of this little dance that I do is to get them to stop thinking about what they're actually doing. And quite often if we're on a marketing set or advertising set, we're going to have 24 people's eyes on them as well. So even if they're a model or an actor, they might be nervous regardless. And so I'll do this little thing. And what I've sort of found is that by saying, you be yourself, I can't tell you how to be you, now they're starting to think about who am I, and that starts to distract them. And then I'll do this other thing sometimes where I'll start firing off some strobe, flashes on purpose, also to sort of distract them. So that flashing sort of happens. Harry actually sort of taught me that trick in that he used to shoot some frames with no film in his camera just to get them used to the sound and what it was like to have him behind the camera and them being in front of the lens and all that stuff. Because I'm trying to basically make them think they're in charge. And what they don't realize is that I set the light, I'm setting the exposure and the f-stop and the composition and the background and the set and this or that or all the things that are going on. I've controlled all of it, and now I'm letting them think they're in control. And this has worked well with actors who have that ego that we talked about quite well, because it allows them to think that they're in charge, and then I'm able to sort of capture something a little faster. And so that's sort of been my little formula for capturing portraits quicker, as opposed to getting there eventually.
Okay, we have one more. And I'll let Amelia, you want to tell us about this?
It's the same assignment, practicing with one light setup. And this one going for that Rembrandt triangle on her cheek. But what I was working on was trying to make my friend look powerful. Mm-hmm. And I think we got there.
So I love Rembrandt lighting. I mean, I think understanding painting in photography is super, super important. And if you go back to that sort of time period of photography, or sorry, of painting, and applying that to photography, it's a great teacher, because those painters really saw light and understood light, because they were recreating it without it necessarily being in front of them anymore. And when I was remarking earlier about these ideas that I get from the outside world, it's a very similar thing. I'm seeing it, way different time frame from when I'm actually on set and trying to create that feel. Um, so yeah, I think the more that photographers see light and understand light, the better they'll be as photographers. I hope you guys are using light meters. This is something I always sort of preach. I get on a soapbox about it, but I see too many young photographers, a lot of assistants who don't understand what a light meter does and how powerful of a tool it is and why it's a necessary tool, particularly if you're going to be using strobe lighting, but just as much if you're using any kind of continuous light or even natural light.
Thank you.
Of course, you're right. Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions?
I'm just curious, which Leica did you give to yourself? Was it the Q3?
I'm sorry, which what?
Which Leica? You said you got a Leica.
Of course, I bought the Q2 right, and like a week later, the Q3 came out. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This happens to me every time I buy a laptop too. It just happened to me as well. I thought about switching back and I was just like, forget it. It's just not even worth repacking it and all that stuff. But I actually haven't used it a ton. I did take it on that. What my intention was, more than anything, was not necessarily to use it for work, but more to have it as my sort of vacation camera, because I'd sort of gotten in the habit of not taking a camera with me on vacation because I had this, and I wanted something a little bit better, and it paid off. I mean, that horse photograph that I made did not anticipate that, prepare for it, anything, and it worked out really well, because it was something that other people really received well. So it's a different animal, I would say it that way, because it's much slower to me than the Canon. Very different, and I've brought it on a couple of jobs, but just used it sparingly. I think it's more of just the ability to carry a smaller camera on vacation more than anything else.
It's very different, very old-fashioned in terms of technology.
Yeah, very different. I mean, the sharpness is amazing, but it's so much slower, and the AI for faces is not nearly as good as Canon. So if it's, I was actually just reading a review of the Hasselblad, because they came out with that mirrorless that's 100 megapixels, not just the 50 anymore. And just this review was talking about how if you're somebody that wants to shoot sports or things that are active or in any way, this is not the camera for you, which I sort of see Leica in that same boat, that it's meant for a more studied photograph, which for somebody that's moving so fast on these jobs all the time, it's nice for me to slow down, very more similarly to the 4x5 that I was talking about earlier, where 4x5 camera, I used to carry around a frame, and I would just find my picture way before I even took the camera out of the box. And it was, picking a frame and then putting the camera into that frame and then taking the image.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just one other thing I'll tell you guys, that obviously you're all getting in the mix of buying a lot of us stuff. I do have discounts with Westcott and Spider and Hoodman and Cam Ranger and Think Tank Photo. So if you ever need discount codes, feel free to just DM me on Instagram. I'm happy to supply that. And advice about, you know, gear to buy, all that kind of stuff. It's all fair game if you have questions about it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thanks, Ian, for making the time.
My pleasure. Thank you guys.